Here's the big question.
Yeah,
Are you a plotter or a pantser? Like where you kind of sit on that
yeah.
path?
I really try to be a plotter, but I fail
Hmm.
miserably. So
Yeah.
at heart, I'm really a pantser. I kind of I do I say I sit in the middle. I don't. I think I'm definitely more on the pantsing side. I try to outline, but my story never follows that path. So I don't know why I try. In my head, I think I'm saving time by trying to plot it out. But the story, I have a general sense of where the story needs to go, but the path that it takes to get there is often not the path I expected it to take.
Hmm.
My first book, I it was straight pantsing. I didn't try to outline it. That book was mostly for me just to prove to myself that I could write a novel length book. Um, with Eclipse, it ended up being, I'd say I probably outlined it to some degree, but when I got to the end of my first draft, I was surprised myself with what actually had to happen, and I had to go back and rework it.
Hmm.
With Chimera and Resurgence, which are books 2 and 3 in that series, part of the reason why I released it October, November, and it came out the way it did was it was supposed to be one book, but I knew where the endpoint of that book needed to be, and it took me 900 pages to get there. And because
Yeah.
Eclipse was 300 pages, I didn't want to release a 900 page book too.
Hmm.
So I ended up
Right.
kind of like splitting it and reworking kind of that middle section so it could function as their own books. So yeah, like as much as I try to outline, it doesn't really work out for me. So
Yeah.
yeah, I'm a pantser at heart.
I think I definitely am kind of the same. I love the idea of outlining, and I definitely have general ideas of where things should be.
Yeah,
But at the end of the day, like all of a sudden I'm just like, well, this doesn't follow anything that it follows the general like idea of where I thought I should go, but not at all like how or what or all the little details of everything. But you
yeah,
know,
exactly. Yeah, I've been working on this follow up on the greatest pub in the multiverse, and I actually went. I'm like, okay, well, I'm gonna write mini chapters instead of trying to write an outline. And what I went and I started actually writing paragraphs. I'm like, okay, this is gonna happen here and next on the next chapter, trying to trick my brain into thinking it was pantsing while I was actually really outlining. And now that I'm in the drafting, I didn't do it for the whole book. I kind of got to a certain point. I'm like, okay, I'm going to start writing now, and I'm already way off where I thought I was gonna gonna be with it. Just
yeah,
it doesn't work out for me, but I'll probably continue to try. In
yeah.
my head, I'm saving words, but yeah,
I think it's nice. It's nice to attempt it at least. To at least,
Mhm.
I think for me, it's more like brainstorming. You kind of like
Yeah,
you're kind of figuring it out, and you think you know where it's going to go, but ultimately that's not what happens. But so I wonder about so I don't know how to ask this question. So it sounds like you had a book or you had the greatest pub in the multiverse, and then you kind of made a prequel of it, and then you were writing a book, you wrote the second book, and then you thought, well, it should be three. Do you think like, oh, this is going to be a 5 book series? Do you just kind of see how far it's going to go? Like, how does that work for you?
yeah. So for yeah, that's a great question. For Fractured Orbit, it wasn't originally going to be a trilogy, because what I thought was going to be book two ended up being the length of 2 books, and expanded it. And the reason why I chose 5 now for Fractured Orbit is because I actually have the next 2 titles planned, and I really alluded to what those 2 titles were going to be in books 2 and 3. So I really want to keep the scope into that. I'm really not gonna let myself go beyond that. I have an idea of where the story goes and where it needs to end up to actually wrap it up. So it's not like I'm just going to be writing into the dark to get there. But it's going to be an exercise in really controlling my word count and keeping it to 5 book series. And if those 2 books end up being a bit longer, that's perfectly fine. I kind of set up books 1 to 3 increasing in length. Um, so if these two if they end up each being 500 pages, that's completely fine. It's not going to be the jump from the 300 to 900, which just didn't make any sense. So
Yeah.
I'm still kind of have the original trilogy that I had in mind. Really, what happened in book 2 is I added a third point of view, which kind
Mhm.
of expanded the word count. I wasn't planning on doing that, but a character kind of was stubborn and didn't want to be shoved to the side. She
Sure.
decided very much that she had her own story to tell, which was its own interesting process. But they each point of view kind of really has their own direction now that they need to follow, and kind of pull back to the end.
Yeah. Is there like is there an amount of point of views you like, or does it really matter? You just kind of whatever serves the story.
Yeah, I tend to two kind of seems to kind of be my sweet spot of what I like to control the handle. Three was a lot. Three was quite a bit to juggle, because they were in three different places. So we were following really three different stories that now need to be converged back together, and trying to figure out the timing of each of them, where they were at a certain point in time, was again part of what ended up taking me longer to craft those two books, because I all of a sudden in one part I'd written months, and the next chapter it's hours later, and it's like, well, that doesn't work. I need to kind of really make this flow to seem like these three stories are happening concurrently.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah, I read something about, I think Brandon Sanderson does, like he writes like this one person's point of view the whole way, and then he
yeah,
writes the next one, and then he like mixes it all. Like that seems really hard. I
yeah, that's what I ended up doing for those two books. I'm like, okay, I'm just going to take this point of view, write it to the end, and that's where I ran into problems with the timing, because I had just written them like separately from each other, and because I'm like partially pantsing this, like it was pretty hard to kind of mesh the chapters in with each other so that it made sense in a in a linear fashion.
yeah.
I feel like I got there by the end, but it did take quite a bit of editing.